You must have heard the word taqwa. It appears hundreds of times in the Holy Quran. And for people who take the Quran seriously, who have the position, who take the position that the Quran is a divine, eternal, and comprehensively relevant text, we need to pay attention if a word is used that many times. For example, look at all these times. The word is used 166 times in the form of ittaqa. It's used twice as attaqa in that form. And then it is used also, let me see, 49 times as muttaqeen here. And so the word is really very, very common in the Holy Quran. And so it is important that we look at this word. But I want to look at this word from the perspective of identifying how the concepts of the holy text are relevant and core and central to society, to human society. And so that is the reading I make of the holy text. And let me share with you my reading of the word taqwa and what I find in reading the word. Right. So just quickly look at the word taqwa. It really comes from the word waqaya. And then from the Quran and also from old dictionaries and linguists, like, for example, al-Zamakhshari from 1143, the word waqaya is seen as having a meaning of defense or protection or guarding, any of that form. But that is not the word taqwa. The word taqwa is more related to the word ittaqa, which is the word waqaya, reshaped into on the scale 8 of ifta'ala to ittaqa. So it comes from the word waqaya, but then in accordance with the sarf rules of Arabic, it becomes ittaqa. And that really is the word taqwa that we speak about. Now, the word taqwa in the Quran, as I showed you, appears at numerous places, hundreds of times. And some of the times it appears as an abstract noun. Like, for example, when we see وَتَزَاوَدُوا فَإِنَّ خَيْرَ الزَّادِ التَّقْوَى. So then it is used there as, in a sentence, a famous verse that says, then make provision for yourself, but indeed the best of provision is taqwa. Right? So that is that famous verse. Or there's another famous verse, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. Cooperate mutually on the basis of what is good, decent, and on taqwa. So the word taqwa again appears there. So the word taqwa in an abstract form is used quite often in the Quran. But it is also used as a transitive verb. So you can say taqun nar. The Quran will speak about have taqwa for the fire. Or it will say ittaqu yawman, have taqwa for that day. So we're getting to the meaning of the word taqwa, right? Because it's such an important word. So we're supposed to have taqwa for the fire, taqwa for that day that is promised, and then also fa'ayyaya fattaqun. Then we're also instructed to have taqwa for God. So as a transitive verb, you can see the indication there is taqwa for the fire, taqwa for the yawm, the promised day, and taqwa for God. But it is also used in an intransitive way, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. So the verb is also used just generally that you have taqwa, so not taqwa of the fire, taqwa of the day, but just to have taqwa without going over into a object. So then the famous derived noun from the word taqwa is the word muttaqeen. So a muttaqi is somebody that possesses this quality of taqwa. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that the meaning that has been ascribed to the word taqwa has been limiting, because what the traditional scholars have ascribed to the word taqwa, meaning they've ascribed, is simply fear of God. But if you try and use fear as an intransitive verb, it doesn't work. You see, so if you try and use it as an intransitive verb, like لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, have fear, it doesn't, fear on its own doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So the meaning that I want to propose to you today, and that you really see when you read all the cases of the word taqwa, is the following. I want to offer you the following meaning. That is that taqwa is in fact consideration. Taqwa is consideration. And to be a person of taqwa means to be a considerate person. And to be in possession or to hold taqwa of Allah means to consider God. Of taqwa of the fire means to consider the fire. Or taqwa of the day means to consider the day. And that is really what we mean when we speak about the word taqwa, is we speak about consideration. And that is such a key point in the Holy Qur'an. Now, why am I not promoting or supporting so much the idea that taqwa simply means fear? You see, fear is a feature of the reptilian brain. You see, the reptilian brain has basically just a few emotions on which it acts, which is fear, hunger, anger. And so the reptilian brain is really what drives those base emotions. But consideration, or another word for consideration, is concern. Concern is a very human attribute. You see, whereas fear, hatred, anger, hunger are animalistic emotions, the human quality of consideration and of concern is something far superior. To have consideration of God is different from fearing God, because in consideration there is an understanding involved of what God means. In considering in having consideration of the final day, or the day of judgment, we understand what the day means for us, and we hold it, we keep it in mind, and we consider it, and we have concern for it. So concern, consideration, those are the words that we should be using for taqwa rather than the word fear. Now, there are also people who use the word piety for the word taqwa. I guess, piety being a religious term would be suitable in a sense where animals can't be pious. We are pious when we are considerate, when we are concerned, when we think, when we are measured. And so pious would be to be measured, to be appropriate in what you do and how you act. And so I guess piety is a good translation. It's a fair translation. But I think for really exploring the term and for having a better understanding of the term, I want to look at the word concern. You see, and I don't want to make this quite a long video, but I want to relate it to some social science thinking also. So concern is an aspect in social science that is closely associated with agency. Right? Agency is the propensity of human beings to act with intention on the world they experience. So let me just repeat that. Agency is the propensity for human beings to act with intention in the world which they experience. So we are all free agents. We're supposed to be free agents, but we are enslaved. And the agency is stripped away from the slave. So the slave is unable or disallowed from practicing from exercising their intentional action in the real world. So that is the meaning of the word slavery. It's somebody who is prevented from acting intentionally in the real world. Now, in social science, and as a social realist myself, we believe that concern drives agency. I hope you're not going to get lost here, but these are very important concepts for us to really understand the power and the depth of the Qur'an. You see, concern drives agency. We act based on our concerns. Now, that is a human feature. Now, what we experience in the contemporary world, where human beings have become slaves to materialism, slaves to the powerful elite, is that human beings no longer act out of concern. They now act out of fear. They fear the retribution of the powerful elite, of their boss, of their governments, of powerful people in their community or in their society. And so people are no longer acting out of concern, but out of fear. And not just out of fear, because there are sometimes rewards also, so they act out of reward. So if you want to understand what is fear, what is reward, what is enticements, then that can be summarized in one word called interests. Right, so what we find in the Quran is that people who are deviated, who are enslaved, who have become lost, such as the society that we find ourselves in, act purely out of interests, out of self-interest. And that is the reptilian brain. We act to fill our stomachs, we act to prevent injury and harm to ourselves, and we act purely out of self-interest. And in global geopolitics, you can see that word self-interest, or the interests of America, the interests of Israel are being used all the time, because we are living in the paradigm of the reptilian human being, the human being that acts purely on stimulus to the reptilian brain. And you yourself, I'm afraid, if you act on interest, if you act to secure your salary every month, if you live to secure your own safety and your own best interests, then you are acting in accordance with the reptilian paradigm, the paradigm of filling your stomach and acting out of self-interest. Now, let me contrast that attitude, that action based on self-interest, because you are not really a free agent. You are just an actor. You see, an agent is somebody who acts out of free will. An actor is somebody who acts in accordance with the prescribed, or with the structured, with the way the structures has shaped his interests. So when we act as free agents, we draw our decision making not from our interests, but from our concerns. Very, very important. Rewind and watch this over if you didn't get what I was saying now. The important difference between the Quranic, or the vision that the Quran advances, is that human beings will not act out of interest, but out of concern and out of consideration. And that is really the key aspect of the Quran. And may I add that consideration precedes Islam. It precedes Iman. You see, consideration or concern precedes Islam and it precedes Iman. You cannot have Iman without concern or consideration. In other words, without taqwa. And I can prove it. The Qur'an says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alif Lam Mim, ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. This is that book in which there is no doubt, a source of guidance for those who act out of concern, who act out of consideration. So not who act in their own interests, who act in to fill their stomachs, who act because that you get a dime a dozen. You see the humanity, the hordes and the masses of humanity that act out of filling their stomachs and act out of self-interest or expediency are a dime a dozen. But the Quran is there for those who do not act out of interests, out of own self-interest, but who act out of concern and out of consideration. And as I've shown you in the very first major surah in the Quran, in Surah Baqarah, which is the second chapter, but really the first major chapter, the first verse, actually the second verse, but the first verse is just the abbreviated 3 letters, Alif Lam Mim. So in the first text verse, it states that this book is there for the guidance of the considerate, al-muttaqeen, the considerate, the conscientious, or the concerned. So before you start on becoming a mu'min or becoming a Muslim, you start off with having a sense of concern. Now, when we have concern, when we act out of concern, we act in the highest possible state of being humans, because we transcend material inducements and enticements. We transcend our love for our jobs and to please whoever else, but our driving force is concern. Concern for who? Concern for the hereafter, concern for God, concern for our fellow human beings, concern for the world in general. And that is really the meaning of the word taqwa. It is a sense of broader concern, broader consideration. And that, my dear brothers and sisters, I want to leave with you as the meaning of the word taqwa. Now let us go back to the Holy Quran and see what that word looks like when we look at the Holy Quran. So let's look at a few verses then where the word taqwa is used. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya ayyuhan nabi ittaqillah wa la tuti'il kafirin. In the name of God, the kind master of all fortunes, dear Prophet, consider Allah and refuse to obey the truth deniers. So beautifully there, instead of fear Allah, it is consider Allah, which is a higher level function instead of fear. Look at this one. Consider then. Okay, that one uses the different one. Those with consideration will be amidst gardens and springs. Innal muttaqina fi jannatin wa uyun. Those with consideration. So again, the word taqwa comes in there. The muttaqina, those with consideration. And let's just look at another. Inna lil muttaqina mafaza. For the considerate there shall be fulfillment. For the considerate, those with consideration. And so, and there's another one, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Then such then is the written code, free of ambiguity, a source of guidance for those with consideration. Now, let me go back to the argument that when we claim that human action should be based on fear, then we are applying the paradigm of interests, of self-interest to to Islam or to our observation of the holy text. And then it means we are obeying God out of fear. And an amazing saying of a great spiritual saint, Rabi'atul al-Adawiyya, called Rabia Basri. And we are firmly into the terrain of the Sufi orders. We are firmly into the terrain of Irfan when we speak about Taqwa. Who said, Rabia, the great Rabia Basri, when she says that, oh God, if I worship you because I fear hell, then burn me in it forever. You see, what she was trying to say is that she is not observing this message or this idea because of fear. There is no fear in her for hell. There is no desire for her to serve because she desires Jannah, because that is the service of a business person. But she says her service is purely out of love of God. And I'm mentioning this because I want to relate it back to the idea of taqwa. Taqwa is not fear of God, please, because it reduces the power of the word. It turns us into an ummah of reptiles who act because there's some heat applied to us, so we run to the sun, we run away from the cold, we run to the food, we run away from the danger. And that is exactly what has happened to the Muslim ummah, to the nation, to the global society of Muslims, is that they've become interest holders. They act out of interest. They want to secure Jannat. They want to avoid Jahannam, the hellfire. And that is why they are good people. They're not good people because they consider it to be a valuable thing to be good. No, that is not important. And that is why I've seen Muslims often to be the most inconsiderate people, the most careless of people, sadly, because they act not out of consideration but out of fear. And so you will find Muslim countries and Muslim societies will be some of the most inconsiderate people. And also why you will find that certain Western communities are some of the most amicable or some of the most comfortable communities to exist within because of that feeling of consideration. Although they don't consider God often, or they don't consider the hereafter, they consider the repercussions or the end result of their actions. So there is not taqwa of God, but there is just taqwa in general. They have consideration, they have a concern for their actions. Although, it's a very partial form of consideration. It's not a concern that is based in the divine. So where the Qur'an comes in, it actually wants to cultivate a concern for the divine, consideration for the day of judgment, consideration for the punishment of the hereafter, and also consideration just when it is used in an intransitive way for people in general. And that is why the word taqwa is so important, because it establishes a community of concern, not a community of self-interest. And may that be a lesson for you, my dear friends, that we are cultivating a sense, and that is really where we want to link up with the words spiritual. What are we when we say we are being spiritual? It means we are otherworldly. We are not self-interested, but our concern is transcendent. Our concern when we deal with people, when we act in the world, with our family and with our enemies, we act not out of self-interest, but we act out of concern, out of greater concern that transcends our own well-being. I hope that establishes clearly with you the meaning of the word taqwa, and it is really the feature of the ideal society. If we can become a people of concern, a people of consideration, inshallah, May we become those people, and then truly we will build the ideal society.